Well, he's back, folks. The New York Mets have re-signed Sean Manaea. We'll talk about it on today's show.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code Locked On LB for $20 off your first purchase. I'll tell you guys what. I literally just finished recording a show about Alex Bregman, if the New York Mets would potentially sign both Bregman and Alonso. It was a lot about Mark Vientos and his future at third base, and just wrapped it up. Felt really good about it. It was 1:45 in the morning. I was about to start editing that podcast, and what comes across my screen? I get a text from my friends over at Just Baseball, where I work. Manaea to the Mets. And I look it up, and sure enough, a Jeff Passan bomb is here, and the Mets have brought back Sean Manaea on a 3-year, $75 million deal. So I guess we're going to save the Bregman podcast for tomorrow, unless, I don't know, the Mets decide to sign Pete Alonso or Bregman or somebody else, and that show that I just finished recording never sees the light of day. But let's talk about the most relevant news on the table here, which is the actual news. The New York Mets have made their first big move to follow up Juan Soto, and it is to get their ace back from this past season, Sean Manaea. 3-year, $75 million deal. To me, the thing that jumps out first and foremost, 3 years. That is exactly what I think the Mets wanted when it came to Sean Manaea. I think if there was ever a sticking point between these two sides when it came to negotiating this deal, it was that. It was years. And you end up getting him on a 3-year deal. He's going into his age 33 season. You're paying for age 33, 34, and 35. I think that's great value for the New York Mets. They are getting the rest of Sean Manaea's absolute prime. Now, $25 million per, is that a little bit steep? I mean, I guess on the surface you can say it is. But what we just saw from Sean Manaea this past season, to me, it's worth paying that dollar amount. You're looking at this market. If it wasn't Sean Manaea, who is it going to be? The Mets never seem to be in on Corbin Burnes. I think we can say at this point they are not in on Corbin Burnes under pretty much any circumstance. So if Corbin Burnes wasn't going to be a New York Met, you were left with Jack Flaherty at this point and Walker Buehler. And to me, both those guys carried more questions than Sean Manaea. For Jack Flaherty, can he play in New York? Sure, he pitched in LA, but he's an LA guy. How would that have looked going to the Mets? Also, Jack Flaherty, a couple years ago, wasn't very good. Now, Sean Manaea, you could say, well, he wasn't very good either, but I still just am not as bought in on Flaherty as I am on Sean Manaea. Maybe that's biased. We just watched it firsthand. I didn't watch every single Jack Flaherty start. If I did, maybe I would have been more on board with that. At the same time, Jack Flaherty is 29 years old. Is he signing a 3-year deal? I imagine Flaherty is holding out to maybe get at least 4, if not 5 years. He's young enough to do it. Sean Manaea just did it in New York. He was the Mets ace. There's no doubt about it. Luis Severino had a very nice season, as did Jose Quintana. When it came down to it, the guy the Mets wanted on the mound, the guy that they were keeping on 5 days rest down the stretch because they wanted to make sure they got as many Sean Manaea starts as possible to make that playoff berth, he was the guy. He was the one. The Mets, across his starts last year, they were 15-3 down the stretch when Manaea was on the mound. Throughout the season, they were 23-9. They won when he pitched. And what he unlocked when he dropped to that Chris Sale arm slot, he became a dominant pitcher. He was then able to rack up the double-digit strikeouts. His fastball up in the zone was so tough for hitters to get to. He, really obviously had been working on that sweeper for a while, and that was a good pitch for him. But being able to have that fastball up in the zone last year, especially when he dropped that arm slot, it just made him so tough. And I think the difference between Sean Manaea early in the season to the guy we saw at the end of the year is he just was on attack mode. He was on attack mode every single start. He knew his stuff played. There was no doubts in his mind how good he can be. And he just went after guys. And I really think moving forward, what he did last year was not just a one-year thing. I think he can go out and he can put up the same numbers over a larger sample size. Because if you look at what he did, granted, the 180 innings, the 3.47 ERA, all that stuff was great. There was a stretch there, and I don't have it all in front of me. I don't have any notes for this show. I had my show recorded, and then this just happened, and I just hit record again, and we're starting anew. But from a large sample size, I think it was pretty close to when he drafted that Sale arm slot. He held batters to the lowest opponent batting average in baseball for like 2.5 months. And his whip was, if not the best, it was like top 3 for 2.5 months. I mean, there was a large stretch there where Sean Manaea was better than most pitchers in baseball at keeping traffic off the bases, and he did a good job keeping the ball in the yard too. So I completely am bought into the fact that you can go into next year and say, Manaea is the Mets ace. And I don't think that you have to get a pitcher ahead of him, and I don't think the Mets will. They have Manaea and they have Kodai Senga, and they're going to hope that one of those guys can be the answer, and you never know what happens behind them. But when you looked at the market, Manaea was the best possible option. I even think if you compare Manaea to the trade market, who's the top name available right now? Jesus Luzardo just came off the board, and Manaea, had a significantly better season. Luzardo was hurt and wasn't good when he was on the mound. But if you look at who was left in this trade market after Crochet dropped off and Luzardo now, Luis Castillo is still the big name we're all waiting to see what happens with. And we don't know what the Mariners are asking for. But now you hold on to all your prospects, and you were going to potentially, let's say you traded for Castillo, you were going to pay him $24.15 million per season. And he also had a kicker, a trade assignment bonus as well. So he was going to cost $25 million anyway, basically. You sign Manaea to that deal here. 3 years, $75 million. It pretty much lines up with the Castillo contract without giving up the prospects. And Manaea is coming off a better season. So to me, this was a slam dunk the whole time. It also tells me that if I know one thing when it comes to free agency, I know the New York Mets, because I made predictions going into free agency for just baseball. I did an article, the top 20 free agents, and I predicted a landing spot for all of them. The only two I've gotten right are the two that the Mets have signed, Juan Soto and Sean Manaea. Actually, I also got Tylor O'Neill to the Orioles. So I'm not 3 for 20 yet, probably like 3 for 12 or something like that. But to me, this always seemed like an ideal fit. Manaea clearly loved pitching for the New York Mets. He was a clubhouse leader. And you also bring in Frankie Montas, who's one of Manaea's best friends. Montas talked glowingly about Manaea in his introductory press conference. So I think this is great for the clubhouse. This is great for your rotation. And I ultimately think this is the New York Mets making their final move of the offseason when it comes to addressing their starting rotation. So we'll talk about that next here. Are they done adding? I think they are, but we'll go through what they have accumulated this offseason when it comes to starting pitching depth. We'll go through all of it in just a minute. First, though, a quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Because right now, new customers can finish off the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Again, that's $250. It was just $150. They bumped it up to $250 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet. FanDuel has so many ways where you can pick up a W, because you can look and you can bet on which players are going to score a touchdown, how many points each team will score, and so much more. Personally, if it was me and I got this offer, $5 bet has to win to get the $250 in bonus bets guaranteed, find someone that scores a touchdown every game and throw $5 on that so you can get that bonus offer. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Stay up to date with all the latest in the world of sports when you check out Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button Our next goal is to get to 12,000 subscribers. I appreciate all of you who continue to subscribe. All right, so let's talk about where the Mets rotation is at today. They have Manaea now. He's either your ace or Kodai Senga is your ace. Those are your top two pitchers. Those are the guys with the real frontline stuff that you trust. Beyond that, you have Frankie Montas, who the Mets signed to the 2-year, $34 million deal. You have David Peterson coming back after a great 2024 where he pitched to a 2.90 ERA or a 2.91 ERA, sub 3. And then you have Clay Holmes, who the Mets have clearly indicated will be a starting pitcher. Until he goes out and struggles in that role, they're not going to just move him to the bullpen. They believe that Clay Holmes can be a viable starter. So that's your 5-man rotation. Now, Kodai Senga necessitates a 6-man rotation, but the Mets have some depth starters. They have Paul Blackburn, who they traded for at the deadline last year. They have Tylor Megill, who has an option year left. So that's important to note. Now, a lot of times we get confused with what options mean. It's not really an option where one time you're designated, that's it. It's an option year. So that means the Mets can option Tylor Megill down. Let's say he doesn't break camp with the team. They can have him start in Syracuse, and then he gets, I think it's 5 options up and down. So now I think Tylor Megill is probably the tough luck starter that ends up in Syracuse to open the season, unless he just wins a job. So you have that flexibility. You sign Griffin Canning to the 1-year, $4.25 million deal. And then you have Jose Budo, who they said will stretch out to be a starting pitcher. But at this point, I would assume Budo is going to be in the bullpen because he thrived in that role last year. He also does not have an option. They can't option Budo. They can't option Canning. They can't option Blackburn. So those 3 guys, if everything holds, will all make the team in the bullpen. Now, that only leaves you 5 spots for traditional relievers. Well, actually, I shouldn't say they all make the bullpen. One of those 3 guys will probably win the starting rotation spot. I would expect it would be one of Blackburn or Canning, and then Budo is likely in the pen with one of the other guys being the long man. Now, let's talk about the front 5 first before we really dive too deep into the depth. When it comes to frontline starters, again, Senga and Manaea are the 2 that go into the season viewed as a frontline starter. But I also think that we get a little bit too obsessed with this idea of, do you need an ace? And I did a whole show on this recently. Do the Mets really need an ace or something along those lines? And ultimately, what David Stearns cares about more than anything else is innings. That's what he's trying to fill. Quality innings. And I think if you look at this rotation, you do have 2 guys in Senga and Manaea that you hope are healthy and thriving. And when they're at their best, you'd feel very good about them taking the ball in a playoff game. And I'm not even going to say that Senga can't do it in the playoffs because of what just happened. He was clearly hurt. He was not stretched out. He was trying to help the team out any way he could, and he deserves credit for that. I really believe Senga can have a good offseason here. You protect him as part of a 6-man rotation, and he proved in 2023 he can be an ace. In that episode where I talked about what it takes to be an ace, I mentioned getting to 190 innings pitched, pitching to a sub-3 ERA, or getting to 200 strikeouts. He got to 200 strikeouts in 2023, and he pitched to a sub-3 ERA. I think Sean Manaea is the Mets' best chance to get all 3, but that's extremely unlikely. There was one guy in Major League Baseball who did that last year, who hit 200 innings, 200 strikeouts, and pitched to a sub-3. It was Zach Wheeler. But Manaea, I could see him getting to 200 innings, the way he was eating innings down the stretch last year. I could see him pitching to a sub-3 because there was a stretch there where he was that dominant, and I could see him, if he got to 200 innings, he pretty much struck out a batter per inning this past year. I think he could get to 200K. So I think Manaea now becomes as high of a floor starter as you have, and the second highest ceiling starter you have to Kodai Senga. I think Montas has the ceiling that's right there with those guys, because in 2021, he was a very good pitcher. He has great swing and miss stuff. He has a really good fastball. He's got a good splitter. If he can figure out some more of those secondaries, I think Montas has a chance to be this year's version of Luis Severino or of last year's Manaea. I think he can be very good. David Peterson, I have always been high on him. I was so thrilled to watch the season he just had, and I think he's going to be a very solid, dependable back-end starter for you at the very least. And he got some big outs in the playoffs last year as well. And then Clay Holmes is this wild card, but the Mets believe in it. And if Clay Holmes ends up hitting, he's going to be a steal at his current contract level. I can't remember the average annual value at the top of my head. I know it was 38 million over 3 years, so that's, a shade less than 13 million per. If he actually is great in that role, it's going to be a huge win for the Mets. He's a sinker baller that now gets to pitch in front of Francisco Lindor. I think Holmes can work. So I really think the Mets have a 5-man rotation that you feel really good about. And that 6th spot in the rotation, you don't have to have a bona fide great starting pitcher in that spot. The best man will earn that job. And you have multiple depth options that could work. Paul Blackburn looked great in his first couple starts in a Mets uniform. Tylor Megill has had his moments. Griffin Canning is the guy the Mets clearly believe in a little bit, at least. They signed him to a major league deal. He threw 170 innings last year. So if you're just thinking about getting innings, Canning can do that. Yes, he gave up more runs than anybody else in the American League, but part of that is the fact that he threw so many innings. He wasn't good, but the Mets have identified a guy that they think they can get more out of, and we'll see how that actually bears out. So I look at this rotation right now, and I say a competition of Blackburn, Megill, and Canning for a 6th starter spot. Budo being in that mix as well. The impending debut of Brandon Sproat, which should happen next year, the Mets' top pitching prospect. The Mets are good in their rotation. They do not have to add anybody else. And I think the one wild card that's left for the New York Mets is Roki Sasaki. That's it. That's the only sort of question mark to me. I don't see the Mets all of a sudden getting in on Corbin Burnes. And there might be fans that want that. It's just not realistic. They have gone out this offseason and they acquired 4 starting pitchers. How many teams can say that? Off the top of my head, I would say 0, because I just can't imagine there's another team that has acquired that much starting pitching depth. I don't even, off the top of my head, think of a team that's gotten 2 starters. I'm sure there is a team that's done that, but not to the level that the Mets have struck here. They have spent in this department, and they had to get a pitcher that was better than Montas and better than Holmes, and they've done that, bringing back a guy that had a ton of success in their uniform, that they have a lot of faith in, and ultimately the marriage just made too much sense. So Sean Manaea is a New York Met again. I think the contract is fair value for both sides. Yeah, it's more than you would have expected. Last year, Manaea pitched for you at $14.5 million on a 2-year, $27 million deal with an opt-out. And now he just basically matched almost the entire guarantee that he got a year ago for an average annual salary. That's pretty crazy, but he earned it. He went out, he dominated for the Mets. He helped carry them to Game 6 of the NLCS. He nearly turned that series around against the Dodgers by winning Game 2 and looking dominant against a Dodgers team that won the championship. Granted, he ran out of gas in that Game 6, was not himself. He said he sort of ran out of gas at the end of that Game 2 start, but what we saw before that was a lot of really good pitching for Manaea. I think this was exactly the move they should have made. I don't think that Luis Castillo would have been a better move. And in fact, I think it would have been a worse move, because you would have had to trade prospects that you now can save and that are in the holster. So let's say the season bears out and the Mets are in the mix in the playoffs, if not, leading the division at the deadline, but they realize they need an ace. Well, maybe those prospects you didn't trade for Castillo are available to you, and all of a sudden you're calling the Marlins up for Sandy Alcantara at the deadline. I mean, we don't know what the future holds, but this was the best possible way to finish off this rotation. And now the only thing that looms here is, can they get Roki Sasaki? And I actually want to close the show there, just when it comes to finding that ace, and could Sasaki be the hidden ace that they end up landing? We'll talk about that to close out the show. First, though, the quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time, the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. And their Game Time Picks feature is going to make it easier for you to get tickets for your favorite live events, because you can filter out the fluff and they will show you only incredible deals on great seats. So don't have to waste your time searching through thousands of tickets. You just see the best possible deals, and you can view your seat before you buy, so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. You can see all-in pricing up front, so you don't have to see those hidden fees that'll come at you when you try to pay. It's all there for you if you hit that all-in feature, and you can buy tickets in a matter of seconds. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, Create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. If you're an everyday listener to the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. This is our texting service. You get updates from me anytime news breaks on the Mets, unless that happens at 1:45 in the morning and I don't text you guys then. But this is the place to go. If you want to get all the inside access to the show, you can take part in our Locked On Mets sign photo giveaways, and you can ask me questions anytime. You're going to be a Locked On Mets insider. Find the link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Now, I just looked up to see if there's any further details on this Sean Manaea contract. 3 years, $75 million, pending a physical. That's all we know right now. We don't know if there's any deferred money in there, although I strongly doubt it, or if there's no trade clause or anything like that or opt-outs. My guess, this is probably a straight deal, 3 years, $75 million, $25 million per year. And that really does cap off what the Mets are going to do here unless they can sign Roki Sasaki. I think when it comes to the starting pitching market, the Mets now withdraw. I can't see them now all of a sudden signing Walker Buehler. Now, could it happen? Conceivably, but if you're Walker Buehler and the New York Mets have already pretty much guaranteed a starting spot in their rotation to Manaea, Montas, Holmes, they have Peterson in tow, they have Kodai Senga, they have Blackburn, they have Canning, they have Megill, they have Budo. It's so crowded. Walker Buehler should try to sign somewhere where he's going to get run no matter what as a starting pitcher. That's not going to come with the Mets. And why would the Mets at this point invest in Buehler, as much as I love the idea at the beginning of the offseason, when he should make upwards of $18 million? Again, I had to record an entire show about Alex Bregman. I'd rather allocate some of that money to Bregman than bringing Bregman and Alonso. To me, at this point, the focus shifts right back to Pete Alonso, potentially Alex Bregman. Those are the two guys the Mets have been linked to. And then beyond that, they are in the sweepstakes for Roki Sasaki. See if you can sway him. And I don't think that signing Manaea prohibits you from getting Sasaki. I don't think that that would dissuade him from coming to the Mets, because ultimately, for Roki Sasaki, if he chose the Mets, it would be because he viewed the Mets as the best place for him for his career long term. He would think that the Mets have the best pitching development. It's a chance to win. It's a market where he can get endorsements. And if he picks the Mets, well, he's guaranteed to be your sixth starter, and you have a six-man rotation locked in. It's Senga, Manaea, Sasaki, Montas, Peterson, Holmes, and that's your six-man rotation. It is set in stone. There's pretty much no wiggle room come to camp. And yeah, you're probably shopping Blackburn and Megill, maybe even Budo, and you're trying to potentially trade one of those guys for a standout reliever maybe, or just trade him for some prospects. And you know what? At that price point that those guys are at, from Megill being, what is he, ARB 1? Can't remember if he's ARB 1 or he's still pre-ARB. He's certainly not making a lot of money. And then Blackburn, I think it's like $5 or $6 million. I don't think you can trade Canning after signing him. Yeah, he hits arbitration this year. So, maybe Megill is making, I don't know, $1.5 million, whatever it is. At that price point with 3 years of control, Tylor and Megill on the market would get some bites. Are you going to get an incredible set of value for him? No, but you could move him. You can move Blackburn as well, even at the $6 million. There's a team out there that's shopping for starting pitching right now that is seeing the cost of a good starting pitcher to be $16 million in some cases, to see a decent starting pitcher get 13 and seeing, even a bad starting pitcher get 10. And they look at Paul Blackburn and say, you know what, we'll take that. So I think this does open up the possibility where the Mets could now shop their starting pitching depth and see what's out there on the market for them. Maybe all of a sudden you find a left-handed bat that helps you in the DH spot that you can pair with Starling Marte in a DH platoon. I don't know. We'll see. Maybe there's a high-end reliever that a team maybe has a surplus and you can trade a starter for a reliever. The Mets have a lot of flexibility, and ultimately they have depth, and having depth in your rotation is a good thing. If they were able to sign Roki Sasaki, They would just have some more depth, and they would have 6 guys locked in. There would not be much of a competition going into camp, but you can still get that done. So this was the move to make, and it was clear for a long time that Manaea was the perfect fit to bring back, and they get the job done. And I think they got the job done on their terms, because I think the holdup in Manaea's market was pushing for a 4th year or a 5th year. And I'm sure he had plenty of 3-year offers on the table. And my guess, he probably had this offer on the table from multiple teams. I think that there would have been a handful of teams that would potentially have signed on for bringing in Sean Manaea on this contract. And I think ultimately the market proved to be 3-year deal is $75 million, and they weren't getting that 4th year offer. And they decided, we are very comfortable in New York. Manaea said, probably, I want to be a New York Met, and this thing gets done. I think this is the absolute perfect move to cap off this rotation. Fans are probably going to say it's not enough. This rotation is not good enough. And I'd say, look at what they did last year. And I would bet on Manaea to be able to at least replicate that performance. I would bet that one of Montas or Holmes will have a season that surprises. I would bet that Peterson might not pitch to a sub-3, but I would bet you that David Peterson could pitch to a sub-4, and instead of 120 innings, he'll be healthy from day one. I think he can give you 170 plus innings, which is exactly what you want from a 4th starter. And I really think that Kodai Senga is going to give you a lot more than fans are giving him credit for right now. So I think this rotation's in very good shape. And the only looming question to me this offseason when it comes to the rotation is, are the Mets the team that ends up winning the Sasaki sweepstakes? I have no idea how to gauge where they stand. All I know is they got a meeting, and we'll see how that develops. We'll find out that one after January 15th. Other than that, the Mets have to address their bullpen. They got to potentially re-sign Pete Alonso. They have to see if they actually are going to pair both Alonso and Bregman. And if we get no news on that front, that will be tomorrow's show. It's already recorded. But they have to decide if they're going to sign one of those guys, both of those guys, or if they're going to go a completely different direction to address their infield. But that's the last glaring need, along with the bullpen. And the Mets are well on their way to building a World Series contender with a rotation that I think is pretty locked in now. And, of course, a generational talent that's added into the lineup in Juan Soto. It has been a good offseason for the New York Mets. It has a chance to get a lot better. And that's why I want you to make sure you are all subscribed so you can stay up to date on all the latest with the New York Mets. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. If you're following on your podcast feed, make sure you follow your podcast feed or subscribe there. Rate and review there as well. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find the link in the episode description. You can follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listener, your first watch every day. Now for your second watch, head over to YouTube and check out the first ever 24/7 streaming channel that covers everything in the world of sports. We're talking about Locked On Sports Today with our local host from each team, league-wide host from each league, and Locked On Sports Today streaming 24/7 on YouTube.